Welcome to AdBits, the podcast where we talk to the people behind the work, the founders, producers, and leaders shaping how this industry actually runs. AdBits is powered by 2.0 Film. I'm their London-based EP. We cover Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Northern Italy and Austria, fast turnarounds, top-tier crews, standout locations. If you've got a bid, give me a call. I am Alex Grossman, and today I am joined by Mark Jenkinson. Mark is a hugely respected commercial director whose work spans automotive, performance, lifestyle, and branded storytelling. He's represented by Object and Animal, who are wonderful, in the UK and US, as well as across Germany, France, Canada, Spain, and beyond. And over the years, he's built an outstanding body of work for brands including Audi, BMW, Porsche, Nissan, Toyota, Volkswagen, Lexus, Adidas, BBC, and Audible. He's especially known for beautifully crafted automotive films, work that combines cinematic scale and precision with real feeling. What I think makes Mark particularly interesting is not just the quality of work, but the consistency of taste behind it. He's built a long career in a fast-moving business, found a clear lane without becoming one note, and stayed relevant while the industry, the formats, and the expectations around directors have all kept shifting. Mark, it's a real pleasure to have you on AdBits. So, finding a lane, this is a section about that. You've built a very recognizable body of work, particularly in automotive and performance-led film. Did that happen naturally, or did you consciously steer yourself towards that space?
Good question. Thanks for the lovely intro. And yeah, lovely to be talking to you on this. I think it was accidental. I mean, the car thing kind of came out of nowhere, and
I remember the script. I remember the call.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've always liked the average person, kind of liked cars, and I always rode motorbikes, so I definitely was into movement, and I understood speed and that feeling of connection to a machine. I really understood that, and if anything, motorbikes probably gives you that more viscerally than cars do at an entry level. Like a small motorbike, you can still feel quite, you know, sort of godlike on it, whereas a crappy little car, you know, you really have to use your imagination. So I had that understanding, I think, of what cars or motorbikes can convey and make you feel. And I'd started directing little things, and this opportunity just came my way, and for Audi. And I think I just thought, you know what, there's something interesting in this idea, and it could easily be done in a way that was very observational and just, you know, something that might sound viral. Oh, there's a car going very fast in a static position, and you can just see it strip back and, you know, speeding up. Or there's maybe a way where it can unfold a bit more. And I think it was my approach was trying to add narrative, and I don't mean like a story, but just try and have something start in one place and end somewhere that you don't know at the beginning, and it unfolds. So that approach allowed that film to probably be better than it would have been, and more interesting for people, and particularly audiences that weren't into cars, because it was not just showing you something about a car. It was really trying to pull you in to a world, a feeling, and then kind of, you know, launch from there. So that film went really well, and I think just my gut was to try to make more of it, which I think all directors, that's always the goal, but especially when you're starting out, when you're sort of scrapping for projects that are usually small, how do you squeeze everything out of it? How can you make this better? And you have that ambition to kind of punch above your weight a little bit. So that was the other element. I think it was that perfect timing where I was young enough and hungry enough, but not so young that I didn't know what I was doing, because I'd had a bit of experience by that point. So it's just a lovely combination of timing and ambition, and the right project that didn't have too many eyes on it, because it was very small, it was very low budget. And those, sometimes if you get lucky, you can get away with something really cool because no one's really focusing on it. I think if they knew how successful it was going to be, you know, I probably never would have been given the time to look at that script, let alone have a meeting and pitch on it or do it. So it was a lot of luck involved. But yeah, so that kind of got me into a car-y space and a conceptual sort of space, I guess, because it was not a typical car film. It was very different. And then one thing led to another, and you just start, I think, seeing scripts that are in that genre, and car clients come because they see a big car brand do something interesting and different. And I think that's something advertising is, you know, built around, isn't it? Where trend is, where the first of a new take on something, the first time you see something a bit different for that, you know, it really catches attention in the way fashion does. And then they kind of look, well, who did that? Oh, right, okay. So yeah, that kind of started it off. And I love the automotive space. I really do. You know, you really get huge broad range of kind of ideas. It has its downsides, obviously, but as I suppose every kind of sector of the industry does. But yeah, largely it's been, you know, a lot of fun playing in that space just because of the physical scale of it. You know, they're big products, and therefore you need big worlds. So yeah, that's kind of how I kind of fell into this genre, and I found love for it probably more so from doing it than being at the beginning of my career and going, I want to make car films, because, you know, I certainly wasn't saying that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That particular job was fantastic, obviously, and it was a huge success. And again, on the idea itself, as well as obviously the execution, but the idea, it always fascinated me after the event how obvious, how strange the industry is in certain ways, where you've never seen a sports car, which just doesn't sound right, does it, going at speed on film.
No.
Because you're not allowed to show a sports car doing that. So you've always got to do everything else around it. That's why you see these monumental films, because you're never allowed to see it doing anything speeding in any way. That's the law, you know, that's the regulations, as it were. And so for the first time, I think for Audi, it was they were the most excited about that ad more than any other ad they'd made, because for the first time they could hear, because the adverts itself, people who don't know, it was a brilliant. What was the car itself? It was
R8, so it was their like Halo,
which was of the moment. It was a very exciting car. It looked very different to what was out there, and it was on a rolling road, and it was just allowed to roll, and to the point where there's the fire in the back, and you know, it was very exciting. And I was fascinated with the fact of that, you know, in the industry, that's an unheard of. And it was it was such a cool ad, especially when they put it, like you said. I remember getting the call from BBH, and they were just like, you know, we haven't got any money, can you help us out? And obviously Sam Brown had been doing a lot of the Audi work, and so they were coming to us. It's a wonderful situation. And then, you know, like you said, we got away with it in a way, and then that lack of oversight, just whatever, or very little oversight, and then suddenly they were all on the case, weren't they? And then, you know, it was like, it was in the cinemas, and everyone was like, this is the best thing ever.
I think it went on the X Factor final back then as well, which was, you know, a huge ad spend. I mean, the media spend as was always more than the film spend, but I think the budget was like 40K or something like that. You know, it was tiny.
It was £50,000. I remember it. There was 50 grand, and we shot it up in Manchester, as you know. You know, we had a fantastic DP on it as well. And you know, it was such a brilliant thing to be part of. Yeah, it was such a cool campaign. And like you said, I remember the conversation. They were like, we haven't got any money, but it's not really going to go anywhere. They weren't going to do TV or anything. And then I was like, okay, but we're going to get paid more, obviously, if we go on TV.
I didn't get paid initially until
yeah, exactly.
We were like, I think we might need to pay the director something, because you've spent all this extra money on the media. And they did kindly kind of give me something. Which was great, but at the time I didn't care. I was just like,
yeah, no, and why not? I mean, such a great.
I think those sorts of projects are where, you know, you get something that on paper could be quite not boring, but just okay, that's quite literal. And then you have these moments when you're like, but what if we did this? And then it can either go, oh no, we don't want to do that, or they're like, oh, interesting, and then they run with it. And that was what happened with that. And I think you're always looking for those projects that don't necessarily or there's a one way of doing it which is quite typical or as you'd expect, and then there's maybe a way of doing it that is a bit different, and you run the gamble of them not wanting that. But I don't know, that you don't get those that often, and it's very exciting when you have a way in your head of going back to them to say, can we do it like this? This could be really interesting. And you know, that's definitely something that's gotten harder. I think back then there was a lot more, clients were a lot more in tune with their agencies and being led by their agencies, and perhaps less global. So you had smaller clients in different areas feeding in directly to agencies. So in London, you know, with BBH and Audi, extremely creative, one of the best agencies going, with a great client, with a great history. And that it's only a few steps to being, all right, we can make a great piece of work here. Whereas I think that's eroded a lot, and is often what you're up against. It's like, yeah, how do you translate or communicate this idea, this approach to a global feeding client where there's so many more layers? And, you know, so yeah, I think that was back to
it was a perfect storm of everything coming together at the same time. Yeah, and it was just, you know, it was so good. I think also what was interesting in that film, and what's, you know, fascinating to me in a way as well, is how important the sound was in that. You know, like the sound became like it was like its own, you know, that's not normal in most communications at all. And you lose the sound. People are always frustrated. The sound people are always frustrated how when it gets mixed, you lose that. But it was just great, and it was the simplicity, the way you shot it, your vision on it, everything just came together. It was such a joy. It was such a fun one, you know, and it's one that when you make something, you watch again and again, which is very far and few between when you watch again and again, as we know. So I wanted to put on the next point, which was there a point where you realized people were starting to come to you for a very particular kind of work?
I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess that was about the time, but it wasn't that I got only, and I was happy about this, but I didn't just get sort of abstract or conceptual stuff. You know, I think there would have been a world where I could have seen myself doing things that never had people in them and were very, you know, beautiful or visceral or whatever. And that's certainly not what I want. You know, I like doing that, but I didn't want to just be in that sort of, humanless world.
I remember all of that, and I've actually got my next question which is quite funny, which is, have you ever had to resist being boxed in by the thing you became known for? And I've always remembered that was that challenge, wasn't it, with not being boxed in, and also being open to all that wonderful work.
I mean, it's tough because you feel like when you're starting out as a director that you want people to start coming to you rather than you having to really try and convince people and get a shot at something. And once they ring and say, is Mark interested in this? That's amazing. And that feeling was always amazing when you got told, oh, the script's come in and they've asked if you could look at it. You know, that's like, oh my God, wow. Like, that's so cool. And I still feel like that now. And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's like you have to, you know, you're presenting reels and you're in the mix and you get told no, or you get told yes. But when it comes in for you, that's very, very special. Because you know that someone has kind of connected with the thing you were trying to, you know, get them to connect with. But the car box, if you like, it's a broad box, it's a big box, because there's like sheet metal stuff all the way through to comedy to, you know, sort of futuristic conceptual. It really is very broad. But I think I've always struggled and found it hard to like work outside of that box, because it is so broad and it is such an obvious box. Like, oh, it's for a car. If you do cars, you must do cars, because you don't just walk into a car ad. I mean, some people do, but you know, to be really trusted with cars, you need to have done cars. And
Well,
therefore,
I just want to hold you
yeah,
on that, because my next questions. This is great. We're sort of leading. It's brilliant. We're sort of already going into it, but I just want to clarify. I just want to add to this. So
yeah,
my next bit is about automotive craft and control. So a lot of people look at automotive work and they see polish, scale, and technical execution, but the best of it has rhythm, tension, and feeling. What does great automotive filmmaking actually require? Because you're sort of going into that now.
yeah. I think that it's trying to resist sometimes the temptation to kind of focus too much on technique and execution, because cars, they're so easily sort of soulless because it's just a block of metal moving around, and really the challenge is trying to elevate that and inject something else there, because it's easy to make a car look nice. It really is, and there's so much experience globally now in knowing how to light them and shoot whatever. But so resisting this sort of temptation to focus too much on the aesthetic of it, or the technical skill, which is hard to master but possible, and really try and work out how is this thing going to feel, and what's the connection, where's the connection point for the audience, whether that's an emotive thing or a funny thing or just something abstract. But I think that's the hard part. That's what I've always tried to kind of stay on top of on as many jobs as I can, and actually not watch too much. I don't watch that many of my peers' work, because I don't want to get drawn into their style or I don't know. Sometimes you see something you think is really cool, and then you kind of want to almost unsee it, because I'm like, I don't want to.
You find that genuinely, where you're seeing, because I remember multiple times working with directors, and it wouldn't necessarily be a style. Well, it is a style, of course, but the grade would become a thing. The grade of the moment becomes, everyone starts utilizing the same grade of a commercial, for example. But you find that when you're looking at lots of stuff, you've got to stop yourself going, I like that. But then how do you reference? Do you find references do the same, or is that a challenge? Do you see what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think it's because I've always, and I've noticed this through my career so far, there's these sort of periods where perhaps you feel less relevant, and then the year goes by, and then you feel sort of more relevant again, and it's just a flow. And I think that's because I've always tried to pitch what I think I want it to be, and not to try to give them what I think they want, which can work really well for you if it's a trendy moment, a certain style or technique or technical method is all over the place. Then and you see it in the scripts. It's like they write these things. You're like, well, that's because you want this probe lens approach or whatever. And I've always tried to resist as much as possible that, unless I really believe it serves the idea and it's what I would want to do naturally. I try to kind of do with what my gut feels would make the best film, and sometimes that's probably lost me jobs because it's not sort of triggering the buzzwords enough, or the techniques that they want to feel. And if you watch too much of your peer group in advertising, there's a danger, for me at least, that things seep in and they influence you, but in too literal a way. I'd rather be influenced from something nothing to do with cars, another ad that's just shot beautifully, or whatever. There's a DP that, I love what they've done there, or the casting is really interesting there. I'd rather be influenced in that way than watching a load of car work, which I'm just seeing shots or technique, and I want to be as reactive as possible when I read a script. I want to be able to go, I see it like this, and that can evolve. But yeah, if I watch too much, then I almost think, am I going to write that shot or have that idea now put here because I've just seen it, and is that really me?
It's a very it's interesting, because it's a very human response, isn't it? I mean, what you're saying, from a director standpoint, is it's a very natural way to be. It's just normal life. You're talking about the ebbs and flows of whether you feel relevant or not. It's a really interesting observation. It's really good to share those. It's a really insightful share.
And I think, you have to kind of deal with the worry when you perhaps feel like, oh, suddenly everyone's doing films like this on wide lenses and or all about transitions, and like, you know, you feel like, oh, I don't really feel relevant in, that's not what I would want to make. Doesn't make me feel anything watching it, or very few of them do. Of course, there's been standout pieces in every one of these fashionable trends that are amazing, but sort of by and large that it just sort of washes over you and you don't really connect with it, and you sometimes feel like, maybe my sort of way of doing things is not relevant anymore. And maybe for a time that's the case, and then you stick at it, and I've noticed it come back. And you know, and the other thing that's interesting is clients change so fast now, like global brands and whoever's in charge or the agency, so they go through these cycles quite quickly of changing their whole like identity. I mean, Audi, for example, would you know, for decades was all right, they changed their executional style, but the sort of tone and point of view was very consistent. It was just,
you'd always know it was an Audi ad.
Exactly. And now it's like they do 2 to 3 years of blancmange, you know, just vanilla, someone sat in the desert going nowhere, whatever, and then they realize, oh, it doesn't connect with anyone, no one cares, and then they change it, and that cycle is sped up. So in a way it's good, because if you don't feel relevant, you don't have to wait that long, and then they all want something different again, and then, you know, just kind of you have another opportunity to do what you think is interesting again. So yeah, that trend, just got to ride the wave, and I think for me, just stay as much as I can true to it. I did a job a few years ago which was super like transition heavy, and I didn't like really enjoy the script, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna just try this because everyone's doing these transitions, and I did it, and it was just a horrible experience. So it's just like I didn't enjoy it. I felt like I wasn't making a film that I wanted to make and was me. It didn't have my voice in it at all, you know, and I was just like, okay, that was just, I didn't need, you know, I sort of told myself, right, I'm right, that's not for me. And now, like, happily, that's sort of slowly dying a death, and you know, we can use transitions again when they're right and we want to use them, rather than the whole concept of the ad is built on transitions. I
mean, on that point, you're testing, you know, I find personally in my day-to-day life, I get real enjoyment, and I think it's important. It sort of, you can put it onto everything you're doing about testing new things. So you were talking initially about, you know, you've got your way of doing it, but you know, I thought, you know, there's something about it reiterating, you know, trying out new stuff. And so are you doing that in the way you're working, would you say? How do you keep, this is just an aside because I haven't got, you know, just because we're talking, it's got me thinking, how do you keep relevant whilst retaining your own identity, your own sort of brand, which is kind of in a way what it's about, isn't it? You've got I want Mark Jenkinson to shoot my car commercial because this is what he does, but at the same time, you've got to keep moving on.
No, I mean, it's probably the hardest thing, because it gets harder and harder to be bold and to be brave and different with all of the stylistic elements of a film, from wardrobe and casting particularly, especially in car clients. They're very, very anal, because often their product is in every shot, or at least 70% of the story, unless you're dealing with a kind of abstract car commercial, and therefore their product is there the whole time, and they care about every shot because their product is there. So if you're doing a Gatorade commercial, I mean, bar the athlete drinking or the pack shot, it's kind of like your opinion versus my opinion, what's cool or not, because your product, and they don't, you know, usually the director probably has more power there. I'm not saying there aren't arguments and fights and in all advertising, of course, but in cars there's like a lot of scrutiny, and therefore who you cast is often scrutinized way more, because in a bad way, because they think it represents their vehicle, and if their vehicle is whatever, and it really can restrict you. And if you're trying to make them a film that you think will have a tone and a feel and a whatever to it that's you, the cast, if there's cast in it, is you know, vital to that. It's such a big element. And if you can't cast the person you want to cast because you've got to cast this person, you really feel that that's where I start to get worried, because I'm like, okay, now I've got to do my job with that actor, not that actor, which is even harder because this actor was just wonderful and really kind of did what I was hoping for. So to keep your kind of stamp on things it has gotten more difficult. But I think listening to, you know, always listening to the DP early on and get them to, like, I might go through every shot with them and whilst I'm storyboarding, and like get them to challenge me on something. If they think like, what about there? And I think that process of hearing ideas from other people, especially other heads of department, you know, early on allows me to kind of filter and take on new ideas or ignore them, which reinforces my initial idea or helps me kind of better it. And I think that process is really important to me and allows, when you get to the filmmaking side of it, you have really kind of scrutinized things and it reacted by feeling and slept on it, and you're not just having to react on the day, and you know, have a blueprint that's just come from you in a day. You know, you've really kind of tested it with people. So I think over the years, that's something I've learned to really embrace, and allows me to perhaps arrive with more ideas, you know, thought through things a bit more and heard the input. So by the time you get to shoot, you know, there's already a lot in there that you want. And I think I've always liked to go to set with a blueprint. So my approach is kind of 90% planned out, and from treatment to storyboard to shoot and edit is usually a really close kind of correlation. So when I think about it, that's where 90% of the ideas are going in, and then the storyboarding. So that allows you to sort of hold on to something that feels like it's come from you. And then you've always got this like lovely 10% of improvisation and spontaneity and wonderful like idea from the gaffer or even the client and agency. You know, they chuck stuff, and you're able to adapt to that and absorb it because you've got a really strong blueprint. And if it serves that, then you're very quickly able to go, yeah, great, we'll do that. Or if it doesn't, you can give them a very clear, strong argument as to why not.
Also enables you when they've got input and stuff. If you've got a plan, you can add to that. Yeah, you can give them you can enable them to say, yeah, we can try that, because you've always got your plan going on. You've always got the backup. You've always got, you know what you're doing, and that should, you know, if people have that, they're the most, you know, it really, really, really helps. And it's obvious reasons.
Exactly. It's really satisfying, because when you do have something new cross in front of you as an idea, whoever that's from, you really feel like you're picking it or pursuing it because it's going to make your plan better. And you really can react quite quickly because you know if it serves this plan or not. And I love those moments where you do something you didn't think you were going to be doing or hadn't thought about, but it feels totally right because it just fits into it's like, you know, you swap that piece of the jigsaw out and put another one in and it fits like a glove and looks better.
It's interesting as well, because I think you can, what I keep hearing from people, and I think a lot of people forget, and I know that when I was not good at this, was empathy for the process that the script has gone through to get to you.
Yeah.
You know, we get the scripts. You remember what it was like. Well, you remember still, of course. You know, you get the script. You know, this is terrible. This is shit. Why have they made this? Why have they even, you know, why have they blackened my day with this piece of shit? You know, script. It's terrible. And you know, the lack of empathy. And the reason I mention all of this is because what you're saying is, if you have a plan, it seems obvious to me that, you know, it doesn't need to, you can negate or navigate better so many potential pitfalls by saying, yeah, let's just try it on, because you can always do that for the edit, because you've already got your thing. You're not fighting over, no, it's got to be like this, if that makes sense, you know, because sometimes it does work, like you said, and you can enable others who've made the script or who are paying for the job to be involved. you know, because it can be very the opposite of that. You can go in and you know what it's like on set, can get very stressful. It can be, you get ridiculous comments, well, as far as you see them ridiculous. But again, if you have a bit of empathy, you can see that there's not ridiculous at all, because that's been going on forever. Yeah. And well, this person has had the same issue the whole time and all of those things.
Well, the dynamics between agencies and clients and the personalities and the politics, you know, it's kind of insane. And they really quite often get put through the ringer. And it's a real, by the time you get to the shoot, you know, everyone's a little bit kind of on the edge, because there's either fear or a disagreement in the air, which they're trying to, you know, and the more you try and work with them and insert yourself, like if I can be on a job and I can be asked to go and chat openly with the client and the agency together in a friendly way, the more, and they really then want you in that tent or wherever they are, that is always great. And I think I always know, okay, things are going well if we're disagreeing, but they want me there in that conversation. Yes. Because ultimately then you can try to bring the client agency together, or help the client see a different point of view, which helps the agency, or, you know, even understand what the client wants, which the agency maybe don't, but go, look, I can do this, which does that, but just reassure everybody and try to kind of keep everybody working together and that way, because then 10 minutes later or the next day, something else will come up and everyone's already relaxed because they know that you solved the last problem together. And therefore this next problem won't be as big or bad, because it's actually, oh, can you come and have another chat? Because and it's like, yeah, that's how we work. We all chat about it. And I really enjoy that now. I think for a long time not that I didn't like talking to clients and agencies, I always liked it, but I've learned the importance of that diplomacy, and like, it really doesn't get you anywhere putting up a wall. It just doesn't. I mean, maybe in the past you could do that and get away with it, but now it will just create so much tension or instantly, you know, and you'll get nothing. And whereas now I've really learned that the more you bring everyone together, you might lose certain things, but you're going to gain others because they trust you and they feel like you're listening to them. And that's kind of massive lesson, I think. Yeah, to young directors, that's probably what I would start with. It's like, just make yourself a team player with them and you'll get a lot more free reign, I think, you know, overall. Like, maybe some jobs you won't, but yeah, and I kind of really enjoy that part of it now, that kind of trying to solve their problem, you know, and be the one hopefully that goes, well, we can do this, and they all go, oh, amazing. You know, so yeah,
it's that maturity to realize, all the things you're saying, I couldn't agree more with. You know, it's all that, and you're learning, aren't you? It's like we were, you know, testing it out. You know, you try the process of being like, I'm not interested in talking to you, you know, whatever, who are you to talk to me? And then, you know, and then you go, because you see it with younger directors, you know, they just, it's a fear on both sides. It's insecurity. And then when you're older, you're more mature in terms of your career, you're just like, well, yeah, fair enough, you know. Like,
yeah. And you want people to want to work with you again. And, you know, you're not going to do that by putting up walls and making them feel like you don't want to hear, you know, you've got the job now and let me get on with it. And, you know, there's a very few people in this industry, I think, that can afford to be like that. And still, I wonder why you would be like that, because it's not as nice and not as fun. And if everyone's on the same train together, it's way more fun.
All right, so we're sort of jumping about, but in a great way. I love the way you're sort of just sharing everything. It's brilliant. So now we're going to go on to performance and humanity. Sounds very serious. Even when your work is highly controlled, it never feels lifeless. There is still humanity in it. There is still feeling in it. How do you think about performance inside that level of precision?
I mean, I always wanted to work with actors, because I mean, I was an actor as a child. I was in theatre and I always loved performing arts, and you know, that was big part of my life growing up. And obviously, you know, when you loving movies, as well everybody does, but especially people that work in film, you just long for watching an actor do something that makes you feel something. It's just the most amazing. It's like a drug. Seeing actors just kind of create something magnetic, even in a 2-second moment, and trying for that, not to marry that with the precision of, if you're shooting cars or anything, you know, that's, I guess, quite difficult, because you want actors to have more sort of an organic kind of freedom to how they work and input into the film. I think, I don't know, in cars I've always tried to find actors that I could let be in the vehicles and drive for real and do as much as I can for real, because I think actors just then become like, they're not thinking about the mechanics. And I think in cars, you know, it's very difficult because you've got this rigid action. If you're in a car, obviously not all car ads have cars in them in this way, but if you're filming an actor in or around a car, you're very like, there's not much you can do if you're driving a car but drive the car. You can't, you know. So you're
I watched a really old movie the other day. You know, they had those classic where if you're driving a car, it meant that you had to move the wheel like this, and steering wheel. I always find that hilarious. And that
still happens. And it's the minute you put a person in a car and you fake it, you can kind of tell. It's why I would really avoid using like volume stages, because I can't bear it. You see it on TV and dramas, and you know, obviously they're doing 10 pages a day or whatever, and they've got to shoot this long dialogue scene in the studio, but it never looks very good or real. And actors, once you give them something like that to do, it's like, oh, you got to add on top of acting, can you also make this look like it's real, which is something you do every day for real. So like, it's not something you know, so the minute you can put them in a scene where they're not thinking about practical mechanical things, they're just doing it, like driving, yeah, it might be a bit more dangerous, or you have less takes because you've got a lockup and you can only, you know, but everything you do inherently looks great because the actor's just doing their thing. They're not worrying about the driving bit, and you don't need as many takes. You don't, you know. So I think that's a big part of it, is trying to do as much as I can for real, for
authenticity.
Yeah,
it's the key, isn't it?
The actor can just act, rather than you going, oh, that was great, but your hands you were turning, you know, and that's just like, what the hell? Like, we're wasting a great piece of performance because the steering wheel's in the wrong place. And that will never happen.
Totally overthink about where my hand would be. As you were talking about, I was thinking, because you know, when you're driving, you know, you can be quite relaxed or not, or and you know, like you said, unless you're driving, you know, and also if I'm talking, say there's a dialogue piece, I'd be talking, I wouldn't be looking at the other person. I'm one of those annoying people who, you know, not annoying, but I'm like you can't look to the side. Right. It's dangerous.
It's like when someone's in a movie and someone's riding a horse, you could tell it was a real horse, because they're just, you know, and no machine can recreate the actual feeling of being on a horse, and the sort of things you just inherently the instinct of looking here and sensing something there. So I think that's definitely something I always push for the actors, and they love it. Like, actors they can't believe, they're like, really, I'm driving for real? I'm like, yeah, don't worry, it's all safe. You've got a light there and a camera on the bonnet and looking at you, but don't worry. And they're like, okay. And as long as you cast people that are smart enough, and you can tell they're just gonna, I mean, good actors, I've always found, just run with this idea. And it's like when you see actors in movies, they go, I trained to do this, and they love that. They love a skill, like applying a skill and a technical thing to performance. So yeah, that's a big part of it. And then I think just casting in general, it's very easy in cars to kind of take the path of least resistance, and it's easy to find, you know, good looking people that can sort of act okay, and then they end up in the film and they're just forgetful, or they don't really add anything unexpected or interesting. And I think now it's really about trying to fight for cast that you really believe in. And that's probably the biggest battle I'll have. I'll rather lose anything else, but the actor's the one I want to fight the most for.
But it anchors the film, doesn't it? I mean, the whole energy. It's like when you see, I don't know, you see the Paul Thomas Anderson, you know, his films. You know, you could just, it's that whole thing. It's like real people almost. It's like it's got to be. It's your signature. It's like it's immediately more interesting and engaging.
Yeah, and just knowing that there's an emotion or a feeling I want to get, and this person has that instinctive, natural way, and that's, you know, that's the bit that really for me is like that's representing the feeling I want, and yeah, just trying to convince clients of that, and be brave.
It's very difficult to the word's not translate, but to convey that.
Yes,
when it's not there. Because one of the things I wanted to ask you was when a commercial really lands emotionally, which is the whole purpose of any communication, if we're honest, you know, rather than just pretty visual, where do you think that usually comes from?
Emotion. I mean, I guess music is a huge part of emotion. I mean, whether that's a happy thing or a poignant thing, I mean, music is going to do a huge amount. Music will sort of kind of push you over the, you know, you have a great performance and it looks nice. Without the music, kind of pushes you to the top of that hill, emotional hill, I guess, doesn't it? And it carries, it cements what you're feeling. Yeah, that's the feeling you should be having. It kind of, you know,
it's leading the way.
Yeah, and then lets you kind of bathe in it, I suppose, you know. And I've done films with very little actors in, but I wanted it to be emotional. I wanted it to kind of move you in a poignant way, and music's done that entirely for you. And when I've seen client edits where they've changed the music at the last minute, you have a very, very, very different film where, you know, it's only heartbreaking because the emotion is different. It's not that the film's bad, the film's great, but there's not the emotion I wanted. And I go back to like the Porsche film I did many years ago. The bit I was proudest of that and I loved the most was the emotional element of it, because the music was really, you know, not what you would expect to hear on a Porsche film. It wasn't about getting you all excited. It was just emotion, because that was the story I felt was in there. So yeah, music is probably the biggest element, which is pretty obvious, but yeah, I think
it's not necessarily obvious at all. I think, you know, for people who don't know, I think it's a really interesting observation. And I was going to say, is that something you can shape deliberately, or is it more instinctive?
Well, with choosing the music, or do you?
Well, just, you know, the emotional element of it. I mean, when you're thinking about it, you've mentioned, you know, you use music, but it's all the elements really coming together, of course. But, you know, are you able to shape it deliberately? I mean, or is it instinctive? Like I feel sometimes that I feel stuff.
Yeah.
I can feel when it's right.
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that I can, you know, you can bring in all the best people and so you've got the best possible outcomes potentially. But I feel it. I personally, I think is when I see an edit or something like that, I feel it. You know, it's like when I watch a movie, I feel it. So it's instinctive, I would say, rather than necessarily deliberate. It's only deliberate to a certain extent. How do you feel?
I think if I'm doing, like, if it's not something comedy, because the last couple of years I've done a bit more sort of dialogue and comedy stuff, but the stuff that the work that I'm probably love the most and would want to always keep going back to is the more kind of visual performance and kind of strong emotional, you know, serious, let's say, even if it's got a fun element to it. And that work, when I'm making that, I definitely, when we're shooting, I'm feeling you know, if let's say it's about speed and we're doing a lot of high speed shots and moments, I'm really feeling, and I'm in the, you know, I'm making noises and doing sound effects, and I'm watching the cat and choreographing stuff in a way that sometimes I'm playing music on my phone whilst we're shooting, and it's got that, and I can see the connection. I can see this shot is going to definitely make me feel that when the music's added, and you can imagine the edit, and you know this shot's going to follow on from that one, and yeah, you definitely get into these lovely, I don't know, emotional states, if you like, where everyone's connected and you're really understanding the feeling. And then you just got to try and refine that in the edit and get the editor to tap into that by playing music and playing shots and say, look at this with that and hear this, and you see how that makes you kind of just, you know, and that's really satisfying, and definitely something you instinctively, I feel when we're shooting. I know when the shots are working that I've got, this is going to translate when you add all the other ingredients together into an emotional feeling. At least it would for me. Maybe not everyone feels it, but it's
working. It's working clearly. So now moving on to longevity and taste, you've had real longevity in a business that can be quick to move on. What do you think has mattered most in building a directing career that lasts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we touched on this a bit earlier, in that trying to stay true to what you think is best for a treatment is probably the biggest thing. And I've lost many jobs because of that, and won many jobs because of that, I suppose. And just riding that, it's like investing, I guess. It's long term, and if you constantly second guess yourself and kind of doubt that and go, oh, I'm going to do this because I think that's what they'll want, I think you're more at risk of a short-term flame, because you're following trend, or rather than following what you think is going to be the best or the most powerful film. And yeah, definitely I felt that looking back over 10 or 12 or 15 years or whatever. You can see the peaks and troughs in your career. And I've always been quite classic, actually, in my approach, I think, to film. And my style is quite classic, even though, you're pushing technology and you're really pushing the limits of stuff in that way. The actual, it's not full of whiz bang or crazy stuff always. And that is good and bad. It means some films perhaps I look relevant 5-10 years later. They still look relatively fresh, but it does mean that other times people are really not wanting, a classical approach. They want something totally off the wall and weird. And I think for me, unless the idea really is about that, it's not very natural for me to take a typical idea and try to just execute it in a way that's just weird for the sake of being weird or different, because I just don't kind of think like that, I suppose. That's probably the main, just staying true to.
And on that point, I mean, just sort of when you look back at your own work, what do you think has genuinely aged well? I think that for the ad that we were talking about, the R8, still works fantastically well. But from your perspective, so many other things since then. What do you think? What are you still pleased about?
I think, definitely a lot of the Acura stuff that I did, the sort of 2 or 3 films for them, the black and white film that we made it in COVID, and when it came out, it kind of came out almost to like nobody, because I think people were just so not in that space where they had way more important things to be doing than watching ads.
I always remember that meme going around where the world is burning around and people are like, does anyone still want any advertising? I don't know if you've seen that, that was going around a lot, because it was a bit funny.
Exactly. And that film, I think it's probably the thing I'm most proud of, because I look at it now and I'm like, how did we make that film? It's a black and white ad for a car company, a silent movie. It's 2 minutes long. And like what world would clients buy that now? It's certainly car clients. I mean, there's a lot of black and white advertising at the moment. It's very on trend, fashionable, as I was saying, but not really in cars. And it really was like, how the hell did that kind of happen? So I'm really proud of it, but it kind of never really got seen, I don't think, and there was certainly, I don't even know if there were award shows that year. It was like so just dead.
It's so weird.
No, so I'm that one I think has aged really well, but just because it was so different. And I'm kind of contradicting myself in a way, because that's an example of an ad that was really different, but the actual approach to making it was very classic. Actually, it was like silent, it was as classic as it gets, but it was novel at the same time, and it had a lot of fun to it. And I'm just so proud of the way the edit flows, and we move through these eras, and there's all the stunt work, and so that film I think's aged really well just because it was so unique. And then if it wasn't for the model of the car, which dates things now, a 911 doesn't look like that anymore. I look back at Porsche and I still kind of feel that has, like, apart from Maria Sharapova that isn't playing tennis anymore, visually it still holds up, I think, and it's exciting. I think we could have done a better Muhammad Ali now with the advancements in technology, because we were doing really tough CG to recreate him then.
Yeah, but it's difficult with the, it's interesting. There's so many commercials or films that have used CGI, and it is dated by the CGI, nothing else.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of.
Yeah, it's great. And what cool brands to be working with, as simple as what wonderful, for opportunity, what a wonderful thing to be doing and associated with. So now we're talking about how the industry has changed. You've seen a lot of change over the years in clients, budgets, timelines, expectations, and the way directors are used. What do you think has changed most since you started?
Probably cost control. Yeah, I mean, this is, and again, I feel like there's cost control in a lot more sectors than there used to be, but in cars, it's almost every job is cost controlled. And it's really difficult because when you're pitching, especially when you've had experience, how to do something, and therefore what equipment and what crew you really want to be able to do the best possible thing in the shortest possible time. That equate, and when cost control step in and they, let's say, well, you're using that, why don't you use this cheaper Ukraine that exists? And you're like, well, it's crap. And the drivers are not very good, and they don't have the same experience as the people that I work with, and they don't care. And their client, you're going to say, well, your client might get a much worse pack shot or less options of a pack shot because we don't have as many takes in the time, because we're making mistakes all the time. So it's directly affecting the clients.
But their agenda is completely different. Their agenda is just to show a cost saving. It's not about, and it's on the day, it's going to be your fault because you won't be able to do that. So I mean, it's maddening, but that's the way it works.
Something that you can't do anything about, and you warn them about, and it's not even that they're really, the clients don't even often like them. I mean, they're not even working. They're like a subcontractor that's from a department that buys the tires and the bolts. They don't know, where do we get, they don't, they're not marketing. So that is, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful because I understand why they have them, but it's getting to a point now where you're compromising over a few €1,000 sometimes, where we might lose a job because of €2,000 because someone's just either underbid some piece of equipment that you can then, when you watch, you'll see it when you watch the film, you'll go, well, it's just not in the same league. And I think clients' work suffering, it really is. So that's definitely been one of the hardest things I've noticed change is that the level of cost control. There's the quibbling over tiny amounts of money, which could end up and do end up really kind of costing the film, I think. I understand it.
On that point, like, this is something related to this, has the pressure for speed and volume changed the role of the director now?
Yeah,
there's so many variables coming out now. I just wondered, like, before we had a very simple thing. We had a very specific script that we shot. Yeah, and now that's just not the case. So how has it changed from a director's point of view, or has it changed?
Yeah, because when you get a brief now, there's often all these other pages of, we need these for this socials, and we need this and that, and all these extra shots for this, and it is quite a lot to take on. But I tend to just kind of not worry too much at that stage, because actually it ends up being more job for producers to deal with, because they've got to work out how to bid it, knowing we have all this other stuff to shoot, which can't necessarily happen concurrently, or it could, but it might be a second unit or an extra day, or maybe not. And that's when then you get involved as a director to go, okay, well, how can we need to choose locations that maybe are not what we would choose, but because we have to shoot a 10-second shot of the car driving to, we need a bit more of control. So it does influence the creative choices, because you're having to produce so many more assets. But I think, I don't know, I try and be positive about it, and think you can, locations are so important to films, but doesn't mean that, you can't make a great film if you don't get the location you really, you just have to adapt and try to help them as much as possible, because they need these things. There's no changing that. There's no winning a pitch because you don't want to do the extra bits of content. You have to tackle it. But yeah, maybe it's having another director, a younger director, or a second unit working alongside, and you just have to be very fast and decisive, and not waste any time. You don't have that luxury anymore where you can pick it up tomorrow or have time. You really have to shoot every minute.
Okay, and on that point, and sort of moving on now to sort of it's glamorously called evolution, but when people look at your work from the outside, what do you think they miss about you as a director?
I think that they perhaps see sort of cars first, as opposed to the skill set and the creative harness, like how to really harness a technical crew and execute stuff in a creative way with it, and maximize that, the understanding of like how to make certain things look a certain way, and how to use equipment in the way that they were built for, and which crew can really extract the most from equipment, and that kind of team, well-oiled machine, if you like, of crew that all understand, rather than just stepping into something fresh. I think that could be overlooked. Like a lot of the stuff I've done in the past, if you remove the car brand, it could be an insurance ad and it's a car chase, or any number of things. And if you were doing an ad for an insurance company with a car chase, you'd use all the same things that I use, like, all the time. And I guess I sometimes assume that people don't look at me and think, oh, why don't we try Mark for this? It does not for a car, but it uses all of this world that, I've spent so many years immersed in and understanding, and therefore actually knowing how to use it's not really the thought. The thought is like, how do I make this exciting or engaging, whatever, and the technical bit is like second nature now. So I think sometimes maybe that's kind of overlooked, is that I could do what I do in cars in other genres, in other sectors of advertising, other sorts of clients, and if anything actually push it further, because you're in cars, you're so restricted by the legals, as you mentioned at the start. Doing a car shoot without the legal thing is like, it's like
joy.
heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes you see films where directors have done, not car directors, let's say, and I always, more often than not, watch them going, could have been a bit, that could have had more. I would have turned the dial a lot more and make, pushed things because I'm not stepping into this equipment world in a, oh, can it do that, right? I know the limits, and I know the people with the talents that do certain things in a certain way, and then so I think that's probably maybe something that I would think people wouldn't assume or overlook, perhaps, with me.
I think that most of the best directors I've ever worked with, they have a team around them, so it enables, like you said, a well-oiled machine. So you don't, you've got the casting, you wardrobe, every element. They know what you like, and they are working at the top level anyway.
Yeah.
And that consistency is very difficult to come by now, because the workflow is less, it's fewer and far between. Whereas before, you were just on this not perpetual role, but pretty much.
Yeah.
And the people we're working with, people forget they're like the best in the world. Everyone's literally amazing. And when you're pitching on jobs, when we're pitching jobs, you're at this an amazing level, and so is everyone else you're pitching against. It's massively it's so challenging, but that team and that ability, I mean, it's equally as important. I found in my time, for people to branch out and try new. And try another editor or try different things, but at the same time, in my experience, the best times have been when everyone knows, because your editor knows, everyone knows.
It's better to have a new project, a different creative problem to solve with your team, I think. Where everything else is kind of everyone knows. No
one's second guessing anything, and everyone can feel comfortable enough to share.
That's extremely satisfying when
you trust people. You can trust each other. It just makes everything better. So we're coming to the end now, but I'm going to break it down, because I've noticed we've been talking a long time, which is great. And you're literally, I said to someone, this has been fantastic, by the way. Like this, you've been really able to share stuff, and you've got obviously got great insights. But what do you understand now about directing, as an example, that you did not understand 10 years ago? I mean, you kind of touched on it, but what would be the things that stand out?
That having a filter is going to help you, in the sense that react internally to whether you like or hate something, and then just have a moment before you explain that verbally to everyone else. Because it's just, whether it's crew and you say something that they either misunderstand because you just said it in a hurry, or or you say it so fast and then they panic because they think, oh, did it? And actually what you're saying might be quite straightforward. So just having a moment to think about what you reacted to, and then saying it in a way that is going to actually deliver that in the right way and create the effect that you want, is a big lesson. And especially with agency and client, if I don't like an idea, it's hard, but you've learned to go, okay, well,
interesting. That's always a good one. Go interesting. Yeah.
And then, you know what, sometimes go and say it to your DP or your producer, and they might be like, well, why don't you try it? Might not be that bad. And then you go, okay. You tell them you're going to try it, which they're happy about, and then you try it and you're like, well, 50% of the time it's maybe not that bad, and it's fine. And so that filter works from you being seen as a collaborator, not an enemy, but also it can actually help make the film better, because you just sit on an idea for that split second longer than you were about to. So yeah, I think the filter is definitely an important lesson.
Wise words, Marky. Wise words. I'm loving all this. All right, so I've got something written down. There's a big question here.
Yeah.
So you've built, this is basically the final. So you've built a career around precision, taste, and consistency in an industry that often rewards speed and noise. So when you look at the business now, do you think it's still getting better at recognizing real craft, or do you think it's becoming harder for distinctive work to survive? And in the middle of all that, what gives you confidence about where things are going?
I think work is still being made that is just spectacular and different and catching people's attention. There's probably bigger challenges to make it, and there's probably less money to make them. But I think the fact that we have access to so much technology now, not that does everything for you, but it does, make certain elements of filmmaking easier and more practical and cheaper. So I think in the industry, it's still continuing to excite me and surprise me. There's obviously just probably more vanilla than there was, but there probably was always a lot of vanilla. But I think there's still a lot of very expected stuff. But yeah, I'm still very optimistic. I think that it's going to be very interesting to see if there is a kind of rebellion by audiences to synthetic, stuff, and is the value of an organic thing going to hold any value and any weight? It's too early to say, and I think in places it is, but I kind of hope that certain things come round again, and the value of real things made by real people is something that clients aspire to, because that's a way to be different and not just take the sort of fast and easy route. At the same time, the technology is super exciting, and that's allowing people to do, which they could never have done before, is really liberating. So it's this classic kind of paradox of this revolution, the good and the bad, and you just hope that there's some sort of balance. I think in the short term it's probably going to be pretty crazy and scary, but hopefully in the long term or mid-term we find a kind of way to coexist, and embrace that technology in a way that allows people to still be practical and create stuff with their hands as well, which I think all art forms are the best. Music, for example, technology is just an amazing thing for music, but it still relies on a sort of human touch to bring it together. And if we just pass that all off to machines, I think that will be quite depressing.
I think it's a really good way to round it off, really, with what we're talking about, because it's very present of exactly what you're saying. But listen, Mark, thank you so much.
Thank
you.
I
love the observation. I thought you were very, very open in a very good way. So thank you again. This has been excellent. So I'm just going to read through now the bits that I read through to cover everything off. So if you enjoyed the episode of Ad Bits, follow the show and share it with someone who cares about great work and the people behind it. Ad Bits is powered by 2.0 Film and their London EP. We cover Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Northern Italy, and Austria. We do fast turnarounds, top-tier crew, standout locations. We've just shot with Object and Animal, with your lot. If you've got a bid coming up, give me a call. I am Alex Grossman. See you on the next one.